Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. In April 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands. Little did the Argentinians know that Margaret Thatcher was going to throw the might of the British Armed Forces at them. Nearly 26,000 service personnel made the journey to the South Atlantic to defend this very small but important island. Listen to the snapshots of the 4 contributors to my podcast: Keith Dobson, Adrian Tudway, Brian Short and Steve Hutley. These great men were part of a brilliant team. Thank you for listening. The link to the podcasts are within the body of the text. Thank you.
I was in a unit called 8 Field Force, and that was based in Tidworth in Hampshire, on the border between Tidworth and Hampshire and Wiltshire. And obviously the writing was on the wall with the Falklands, and of course at a strategic level and at government level that we're working out what response they could do to the build-up of intelligence in Argentina. So we something very quickly happened to us. We got moved to Aldershot, renamed, rebadged, and we were there to support an infantry brigade was formed called 5 Infantry Brigade. It was reformed. It existed in the past in various different periods in history in India and stuff like that. And it was reformed, and we were moved to Aldershot, and we did a lot of the battle training in Aldershot, and the support, the signals communication support for the paras and the infantry units that were based there. And then along comes this exercise on Brecon Beacons, where we get sent there, and we do this very unusual training, where we get to fire ground-to-air missile weapons, throw grenades. And we think this is all very unusual, because we're Sparkies, we're signals. We sit in Land Rovers and communicate and with headphones on and stuff like that. But we're doing some of the real gritty stuff. And then after that exercise, quite a infamous exercise, because it was planned to train us in extracting expats from an island somewhere, and we just thought that was business as usual. We didn't know what was bubbling in the background, and then we got told, and how they told us. We all got assembled, and they said, "It looks like we're going down to the Falklands." And of course, at that time, and you hear this anecdotally all the time, people just didn't know where the Falklands were, and so we all got given what we call an MFO box. And if you don't know what an MFO box is about the size of a coffin, but it's square. It's quite a high box, and it's what the boxes that families are given when they move. It's a wooden box with handles on the side and a lid, and you screw the lid on. And families in the army, when they move from one country to another, they put all their belongings, their house belongings, into MFO boxes. And I lived in accommodation in Aldershot. I was single, and we all got given an MFO box, and we got told before we leave, we have to fill this MFO box with all of our belongings and write a letter to our mothers, because this box will not be opened unless we die. So we had to put everything from our lockers, all our personal stuff that we weren't taking to the Falklands, and all you took to the Falklands was military stuff, of course, apart from a pair of underpants and a string vest or whatever. Yeah. And in the MFO box, everything went in. And we had to sit that evening and write a letter to our mothers or our closest people, which were generally mother, father, and write a letter to say, "I love you. I'm sorry it's ended this way. Please look after, this is my stuff that's left. So we did that. It was very macabre. And I remember we all sat there, wrote the letter, put in the MFO box, screwed the lid down. And then the next day we went in the world's biggest convoy on the motorway. I can't remember which route we took down to Southampton towards the QE2. And I remember being on this convoy, and it was amazing. Sitting in the front of a Land Rover, and cars were overtaken and zipping into the convoy. And I just remember, this car with this little kid in the back of the car, and he was scribbling on paper, and he held this bit of paper up to us, and it said, "Good luck, boys." And it's just so emotional when you you think back to that sort of thing, and what was going through not just our minds, but the minds of the population, that in our living memory that we were going to war. Incredible. And it was incredible.
There were some sort of really real comedy moments when the actual firefight started on the overnight battle on Two Sisters. I distinctly remember at one point thinking, I'm not religious. Oh my goodness, where is he? Yeah. What are you doing? Beam me up, Scotty. And then another point, I was thinking, look, this is just getting really seriously out of hand here. Someone's going to get very badly hurt in a moment. Isn't where's the Sergeant Major? Isn't he going to come around and stop all this nonsense?
Who was your Sergeant Major then?
Sorry.
Do you remember who your Sergeant Major was?
Yes, yeah, a wonderful man called Pat Chapman, MBE, and Pat is still alive. And if you're listening, Pat, hello, sir. He's always going to be called sir.
What was it? How long were you there before you got repatriated back to the UK?
Only a matter of a couple of days. We were amongst the first to get going. So we were up on Sapper Hill for a couple of nights. We were down in the town for 3 or 4 nights, and then they rigged up these like enormous waist-deep paddling pools inside the tank deck of one of the Fleet Auxiliary landing ships. And we went in one end with all our filthy clothing and all the rest of it. Hadn't changed anything apart from a pair of socks for about 8 weeks. We went in at one end and the water was all this sort of grey colour, and we were all in there messing about because it was nice and warm. They diverted the engine's exhaust pipes through the pools to keep them warm, so we're all sort of ducking each other, and spitting water at each other. I'm wondering, what's that crust floating on the top? And so that was our first sort of bath or wash or shower, above and beyond what you could do under limited circumstances to keep yourself healthy, whilst it was all going on. And I distinctly remember then going up to the ship's rail and giving a ceremonial burial to my pants that I'd been wearing. Because I don't think Mrs. Purcell's best could have done justice to the state they were in. And we then were moved out to the Canberra.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And pretty much the whole of the Royal Marines were embarked back to the UK on the Canberra. And I have to say, in terms of, conditions like post-traumatic stress that some people were unfortunate enough to develop, I think for us who came home on the Canberra, we had effectively 3 weeks with our mates to decompress.
Yes.
And decompression, for those who aren't familiar with it, is mainly liquid induced.
Was there alcohol on board?
Yes, there was. Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah. And we let our hair down, enjoyed ourselves. I can remember wanting to sleep for days. So you'd sleep, you'd get up in the morning. There'd be a head count. We'd sort of make an excuse about having a little briefing on this or that. Lasts about half an hour, and then, okay, lads, you can have the rest of the day now. Go up and lie in the sun as we got towards the equator and the weather got nicer. And if you look back at conflicts like Vietnam, for argument's sake, or Iraq and Afghanistan. Some of the lessons that perhaps hadn't been properly learned, or the impacts hadn't been properly understood, of people coming from the battlefield and within 48 hours being back at home and feeling lost and alienated and feeling very anxious because their mate's not with them. We had 3 weeks with our mates. And by the time we got to Southampton, I think an awful lot of that potential psychological stress, that pressure cooker, had been vented.
And what was that like, landing at Southampton? I mean, okay, let me go back one. What were your family thinking whilst you're in the South Atlantic? Their son, their brother, I don't know what your family was consisted of, but what was the family like?
Well, it's amazing. I have a big scrapbook of all the newspaper cuttings that my mum kept for me. She bought every newspaper every morning and cut everything out and stuck it in a book.
Incredible.
Even though Canberra was a cruise ship, we fitted about 26 different GPMG machine guns to the rails. So every one of them was chattering away at anything that flew across the sky. Blowpipe missiles, handheld missiles. It was absolute bedlam and chaos. A couple of ships got hit. Several of the planes got blown out of the sky. And then whoever did get out the other side, the pilots, had to fly back to Argentina, rearm, and all credit to them. They had to come back and run the gauntlet again.
Incredible.
So it was one hell of a day, that 21st of May.
Incredible. And and it's a day that you'll never forget.
Well, for me, it's not only about the war element. The very sad thing that happened for me that day was a helicopter suddenly came on the deck with Surgeon Commander Rick Jolly. He was quite a charismatic officer in charge of medical squadron. And he beckoned us forward, and we'd already had some Argentine wounded on board. But in the back were three dead Royal Marines and an air crewman who'd been flying 2 light helicopters that had been shot down. And one of the crews had died immediately, but the other crew, Sergeant Andy Evans, had managed to land in the water, and they were shot at swimming ashore. And Andy was mortally wounded. Now he was a pilot. Used to show me around his helicopter. It was a bit of a helicopter buff thing. And so having met him before several times, and now having to unload his body from a helicopter, that's when, for me, the Argentine became the enemy. The war became very real for me.
Yeah, that is sobering, isn't it? How do you compartmentalise that now? I mean, look, we're much older, but how do you deal with that now?
I deal with it by talking about it. Writing it in the book was very cathartic and a way of dealing with it. Of course, later in the police, I learned to deal with things, decompression. I learned to talk about things. I think it all stems back to the Falklands. Post-Falklands, we were offered some counselling on the way home, which was quite unusual for its day. And although we paid lip service to it, the guy who was dealing with it, Lieutenant Commander O'Connell, a Royal Navy psychiatrist, later in life, when I was at Deal for the Deal bombing, it was the same guy who came. And I think having dealt with him before, I then knew it was time to unload and deal with the issues that would. Whereas as a young man, I paid lip service to it. And now in midlife and now in older life, I realised you have to deal with these things, get help, talk about it, and deal with it as best you can. But that's seared into my memory as when unloading the helicopter, as was about a week later when we performed burials at sea for these 4 Royal Marines, because there was another Royal Marine from another helicopter. So we had 4 Royal Marines we had to conduct burials at sea for, which is, again, it's something you might imagine you see in a black and white film or a documentary. You never imagine you're going to be taking part in such a thing.
How do you prepare for, you get the order, you've got to do a burial at sea. How do you prepare for that? Because that's something that probably hadn't happened since the Second World War.
Probably, yeah, you're right. It was, well, for me, it was relatively easy. All I had to do was turn up and be there. The band provided a brass quintet to play the hymns, and we provided 2 buglers to play a really emotional last post over our fallen comrades. But the the setting, one of the big doors, luggage doors on the side of Canberra was open. There was grey skies, there was rolling seas, it was cold, and everyone not on duty attended. We sang some hymns, and then you commit their bodies to the deep. There's no way of preparing for it. I think the only thing that spared us hearing the splash, I'm glad, was the wind and the drop. And we'd never heard them reach the water. And I think I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, honestly, you've sent a chill down my spine. And I vividly remember listening to the radio about the Falklands, sitting in my bedroom listening to it all. And it seems, I've said this before, it seems like yesterday. But of course it wasn't in real time. It's 41 years ago. And if you take it back 41 years from 1982, we were in the middle of the Second World War.
Yeah, it was closer. It was closer to the Second World War than it is to modern times, which is quite a sobering thought and puts age into perspective.
As a 17-year-old, how were you feeling?
Yeah, it was really weird. Sort of quite excited. It's a little bit different, but it was like they didn't really know. Didn't think that we were going to get involved as much as we did, and it's. Yeah, then think after the Ascension Island, it might have been when we were down at the Ascension Islands, then some press people were being flown on board,
right?
Were reported, obviously. So again, you just think, well, we obviously, something is going off, or just they're going to obviously report on what's going on. But it wasn't until the first British ship, it was HMS Sheffield, got hit,
right?
It really dawned on you, and this is pretty serious.
And were you there when that first? So you're on the spearhead. You've got all the soldiers, the military from whatever section. Had you arrived by the time the first battles had started? Had you arrived on the island?
We'd gone inside the total exclusion zone,
right?
Because again, going back to when you were saying, when did you realise it was going on? Because we were the main ammunition carrier for the whole task force.
Wow.
I remember stepping out on deck once, and it was a beautiful day, and believe it or not, the ocean was virtually still.
Yeah.
It was that calm, and I looked out, to one side, and there was just a flotilla of ships going that side. Looked out to the other, as another flotilla of ships, but either side were our two main aircraft carriers. And then it dawned on us that they were protecting us, because we had the main, we had all the ammo on board us, so we were sort of like the main ship of the task force. I always thought then, if the Argentinians had sort of realised or aimed for us, it might have been a little bit different, but
it had been over for an awful lot of people.
But so once the the first ship, HMS Coventry, I think it was, got hit, and it really dawned on us, because we had the survivors. We were the closest ship in the area that had a doctor on board. Wow. So they flew a lot of the, I don't know whether it was all, I think they sort of moved them about. Obviously, we had a lot of the survivors on board.
How did that make you feel, though, Steve? I mean, all of a sudden, this thing that you set sail for a month beforehand has become a complete reality. How did that make, as a 17-year-old, how did that make you feel? I
always remember thinking that there was nothing I could do about it. That was the thing. I couldn't get off the ship. No. I was there. You either step up, do your job, and just keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And that was all it was. It really dawned on me that, there was nothing you could do, so that there's nothing to worry about, and, keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best.
And the Royal Fleet Auxiliary do a fantastic role, and they're still active. They're still supporting the military ships. But putting this into context, you're 17. The youngest military personnel is 18, if I remember rightly. They couldn't go to war until they were 18.
It was quite funny, because I remember when we did come back, And obviously there was all the TV with all the different, the ships coming back and the celebrations and everything, and they're interviewing everybody. And I remember them interviewing this young Marine who had just turned 18, virtually on the day or the day before. They set sail, so he was old enough to go down there, making a big thing. Oh yeah, you literally, you were the youngest one, but obviously forgetting people like myself who was 17. But there was also a lad on my ship, locally from Harwich as well, who was 16. And as far as I was aware, he was the youngest one down there. But because we were members of the Merchant Navy, not the Royal Navy, we weren't classed as armed forces, so we could still go down there even though we weren't old enough to fight, sort of thing.
But you still got your South Atlantic medal, didn't you?
Yeah, we got our medal. And there's also, if you've seen the medals, they've got a little rosette on them as well, and the rosettes were given out for every month that you were inside the total exclusion zone. You'd get a rosette. So I've technically got 2 because we were there for 2 months.
Wow.
But you have one as decoration on the medal.